The early morning mist clings to the hedgerows along the Bastow River. It is 7:30 on the 1st of August, 1759. 6 battalions of British infantry, fewer than 5,000 men, stand in 2 thin red lines on the German plain west of Minden. Before them, the ground rises, gently towards the French position. Through the lifting fog, they can see what awaits. 60 squadrons of French cavalry, the finest heavy horse in Europe, 10,000 sabres glinting in the strengthening light. The order has come down garbled, mistranslated through the chaos of a polyglot. Allied army. Advance to the beat of drum, not on the beat. A subtle difference in French preposition that will alter the course of the battle, perhaps the war. Major General Waldegrave's brigade steps off first, the 23rd, 37th, and 12th Foot. Behind them, Kingsley's men follow the 25th, 51st, and 20th. They have decorated their hats with wild roses plucked yesterday from these same hedgerows, white blossoms against scarlet coats, an unconscious gesture that will become legend. They march forward, drums beating the advance. No cavalry, support, no flanking infantry, just 6 regiments walking steadily towards massed French horse that by every rule of 18th century warfare should obliterate them in minutes. The French cavalry commanders watch with something approaching disbelief. This violates fundamental military doctrine. Infantry cannot advance against formed cavalry in open ground. It is suicide. But these are British regulars, drilled until the manual of arms is instinct, trained to deliver volleys with mechanical precision. They have been hardened in Ireland, blooded in Flanders, and now they walk towards the impossible with parade ground calm. By day's end, they will have repulsed 3 massed cavalry charges, shattered the French center, and won one of the most improbable victories in British military history. Yet within a generation, Minden will fade into the shadow of Quebec, taken just 6. Weeks later, the roses will remain worn each 1st of August by successor regiments, but the full story of this extraordinary day will become the province of specialists rather than national memory. This is the tale of forgotten brilliance, of ordinary redcoats achieving the extraordinary, of how misunderstanding became legend, and how 6 regiments earned immortality through an advance that should never have succeeded but did because British infantry fire discipline proved superior to French cavalry élan. Welcome to the Battle of Minden, the year of miracles' most miraculous day. To understand Minden, we must first understand the impossible position in which Britain found itself in 1759. The 7 Years' War, truly the First World War, raged across 4 continents. In North America, British forces besieged Quebec. In India, Clive consolidated gains. After Plassey, in the Caribbean, Sugar Islands changed hands with each campaign season. But in Europe, where the war's outcome would ultimately be decided, Britain's situation remained perilous. King George II was not merely Britain's monarch. He was also Elector of Hanover, ruler of a German electorate directly threatened by French armies. This dual role created strategic complications that parliamentary opposition exploited mercilessly. Protecting Hanover drained British resources, whilst critics in London fumed about German subsidies and continental entanglements. Yet Hanover's survival was essential. Lose it, and French armies could turn their full attention to Prussia, Britain's only major continental ally. The man charged with this thankless task was Prince Ferdinand, Duke of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel. Born the 12th of January, 1721, Ferdinand represented 18th century German military professionalism at its finest. 4th son of Duke Ferdinand Albert, he had been destined for the army from birth. His education emphasized languages. He spoke French, German, and English fluently, and military science. At 20, He received command of a Brunswick regiment in Prussian service, beginning a career that would see him become Frederick the Great's most trusted subordinate. Ferdinand first distinguished himself during the War of the Austrian Succession, where his tactical acumen caught Frederick's eye. Unlike many German princes, who treated military command as decorative sinecure, Ferdinand studied warfare seriously. He absorbed the lessons of the great captains, whilst recognizing that 18th century warfare required adaptation rather than slavish adherence to classical models. Swift maneuver, aggressive, reconnaissance, and combined arms cooperation became hallmarks of his approach. When the 7 Years' War erupted in 1756, Ferdinand initially served under the Duke of Cumberland, George II's younger son, in defending Hanover. Cumberland's disastrous convention of Klosterzeven, essentially capitulating to French demands, ended his military career but elevated Ferdinand. Frederick the Great personally recommended him to George II, and in November 1757, Ferdinand assumed command of the Army of Observation, the polyglot force tasked with defending Western Germany. What Ferdinand inherited barely deserved the name Army. Demoralized Hanoverian units, scattered Hessian contingents, a handful of British regiments, and various German auxiliaries, perhaps 35,000 men nominally under his command, but scattered across Westphalia in winter quarters. Morale had collapsed after Klosterzeven. Desertion rates soared. Officers openly questioned whether resistance remained possible. Ferdinand's first achievement was transforming this rabble into a fighting force. He imposed Prussian discipline whilst respecting national sensibilities. Hanoverian units received proper pay and regular rations basics Cumberland had neglected. He integrated the British regiments fully into his battle line, rather than treating them as auxiliaries. Most crucially, he instilled offensive spirit. Within 3 months of assuming command, Ferdinand launched a winter campaign that drove French forces back from the Weser River and recaptured key fortified towns. The British contingent that would fight at Minden had its own remarkable story. 6 infantry regiments, the 12th, 20th, 23rd, 25th, 37th, and 51st Foot represented Britain's commitment to continental warfare. Each had unique character and history. The 12th traced its lineage to 1705. The 23rd, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, proudly maintained traditions dating to 1689. The 20th had been General James Wolfe's regiment before his posting to North America. Many of its officers had served under him and absorbed his emphasis on aggressive tactics and fire discipline. These regiments had arrived in Germany incrementally between 1757 and 58. They brought with them Britain's tactical innovations, the thin 2-rank line that maximized firepower, the emphasis on rapid, controlled volleys rather than mass intimidation. Continental armies still favored 3 or 4 ranks. British doctrine recognized that only the front 2 ranks could fire effectively, making additional depth pointless except for absorbing casualties. The men in these ranks were not the dregs of society that popular mythology suggests. Contemporary recruiting records show many were skilled tradesmen seeking steady employment, younger sons with limited inheritance prospects, or men from agricultural regions during economic downturns. They enlisted for life or until injuries forced discharge, and professional NCOs molded them into the most effective infantry in Europe through relentless drill. That drill emphasized fire discipline above all. British infantry trained to deliver 3 to 4 rounds per minute faster than any European counterpart. This required not merely mechanical proficiency, but also nerve. Black powder weapons fouled quickly, becoming harder to load with each discharge. Maintaining fire rate under enemy pressure, through smoke and noise and casualties, demanded extraordinary composure. Minden would test that composure to destruction. Ferdinand's relationship with his British troops evolved through the campaigns of 1758. At Crefeld, in June, they had fought creditably but not decisively. Ferdinand recognized their potential, whilst noting their cavalry support remained inadequate. The Earl of Pembroke commanded the British Horse 6 regiments, including the Blues, Royal Horse Guards, and Scots Greys, but coordination between infantry and cavalry remained problematic, not least because Lord George Sackville, the cavalry's operational commander, harbored resentments about perceived slights to his authority. Sackville, who would later take the name German, cast a long shadow over Ferdinand's army. Aged 43 in 1759, he combined genuine military experience with profound character flaws. He had fought at Fontenoy and distinguished himself there, but he possessed a brittle ego and interpreted any questioning of his judgment as personal insult. Ferdinand found him difficult. Other officers found him impossible. Yet, political connections made Tim untouchable. His father, the Duke of Dorset, ensured his continued appointment despite mounting complaints about his abrasive command style. By summer 1759, the strategic situation had reached crisis point. Marshal the Marquis de Contes commanded over 60,000 French and Saxon troops threatening Hanover from the southwest. Another French army under the Duc de Broglie operated independently to the east. If they combined, they could overwhelm Ferdinand's roughly 41,000 Anglo-German troops. British strategy depended on preventing this junction, whilst maintaining defensive positions covering Hanover itself. Contes had enjoyed success earlier that year, particularly at Bergen in April, where he had repulsed an Allied assault. Political pressure from Versailles and Minister of War Belle Isle demanded he convert these tactical victories into strategic triumph, drive Ferdinand back, take Hanover, and force George II to terms. Yet Contes, for all his court polish, lacked Ferdinand's operational agility. His army advanced ponderously, consuming supplies faster than wagons could replace them. By mid-July, when French forces reached Minden and secured bridgeheads across the Weser, logistical reality already constrained Contes's options. Ferdinand recognized the danger immediately. Minden sat at a critical confluence. The northward-flowing Weser met the marshy Bastau stream. Control of Minden gave the French a fortified position, anchored on river and marsh, with bridges for rapid concentration. If Broglie crossed the Weser from the east and united with Contes, the combined French force would be unstoppable. Ferdinand had to prevent this junction, and he had to do it immediately. In the last week of July, Ferdinand executed a brilliantly aggressive maneuver. He sent General Wangenheim with a mixed German corps to entrench north of Minden at Toddenhausen, presenting Contes with an apparent isolated target. Meanwhile, Ferdinand positioned his main army to the west, ready to fall on the French flank as they emerged from their defensive camp to attack Wangenheim. It was calculated risk if Wangenheim collapsed too quickly. The entire plan failed. But Ferdinand had taken Contes' measure. The French marshal would not ignore what appeared to be an opportunity for decisive success. The trap was set. Minden awaited. And in their encampments around the village of Hille, British soldiers plucked white roses from the hedgerows as they marched through the countryside. Just a gesture. No special significance. The roses would gain their meaning only through what came next, a day, when everything that could go wrong would go wrong. Yet British infantry would triumph anyway because their training and discipline exceeded even their officers' understanding of what they could achieve. The 31st of July, 1759, brought mounting tension to both armies. Ferdinand's reconnaissance reported feverish French activity, 8 pontoon bridges being constructed across the Bastau stream, clearly preparing for a major operation. Captured French deserters confirmed the intelligence. Contades planned a dawn attack on Wangenheim the next morning, followed by a general advance against Ferdinand's main position. The moment of decision had arrived. Ferdinand issued his orders with characteristic precision. The army would advance in 8 columns at 1 o'clock in the morning, moving through darkness to deploy before the French could fully organize their assault. On the right, Sir George Sackville's British and Hanoverian cavalry, roughly 16 squadrons. Then Hanoverian artillery. Then General Sporkin's column, Waldegrave's and Kingsley's British brigades, plus supporting Hanoverian infantry. Further left, more German infantry under Wutgenau and Imhoff. On the far left, Holstein-Gottorp's cavalry. Additional artillery columns would provide fire support throughout. The plan required precise timing and coordination. Lieutenant General Prince Karl of Anhalt-Bernburg's PK force would screen the advance and secure the village of Hollen on the critical right flank. Once Hollen was taken, the entire line would pause, dress ranks, and resume the advance with cavalry properly positioned to exploit any breakthrough. It was quiet, methodical, careful, and utterly dependent on all components moving according to schedule. The French plan was equally elaborate. Broglie would cross the Weser through Minden with 8 grenadier battalions and additional artillery, then assault Wangenheim at first light. This would draw Ferdinand's attention whilst Contades' main army deployed across the Bastau, ready to smash into Ferdinand's flank as he moved to support Wangenheim. The French enjoyed numerical superiority and positional advantage. Marshal Belle Isle had demanded a decisive victory. Contades intended to deliver it, but 18th century armies could not maneuver in darkness with modern precision. The French night crossing of the Bastau became a masterclass in confusion. Troops allocated to specific bridges arrived at the wrong locations. The storm that broke over the plain around midnight turned the approaches to the pontoon bridges into muddy chaos. Noble officers quarreled over precedence. Regiments became intermingled. Most critically, the French cavalry designated for the center of Contades' line because marshy ground on the northern approaches prevented deployment on the wings crossed the bridges more slowly than infantry could march. The result, as dawn broke on the 1st of August, French units were still debouching onto the plain west of the Bastau in considerable disorder. Ferdinand's army, meanwhile, advanced through the darkness with remarkable cohesion. The troops were accustomed to night marches, and Prussian drill masters had instilled mechanical precision. As gray light spread across the plain around 4:30, Ferdinand climbed a low hill to observe. What he saw confirmed his intelligence. The French were crossing the Bastau in strength but remained disorganized. Broglie's assault on Wangenheim had begun. Ferdinand could hear the artillery fire from the north, but without the drive necessary to overwhelm the German positions quickly. The moment had come. The order went forward. Anhalt's piquets to seize Hollen, the rest of the army to advance to contact, then halt and dress ranks before the final assault. It was at this moment that chaos intervened. Sackville's cavalry, despite being positioned on the right flank where they were most needed for capturing Hollen, were not ready. Whether through Sackville's incompetence or deliberate obstruction remains historically contested. What is indisputable is that Anhalt's infantry had to take Hollen unsupported by horse, and that Sackville's delay disrupted the entire battle plan's timing. Anhalt's men took Hollen after fierce fighting, supported by Captain Phillips's and Captain McBean's Royal Artillery batteries, which unlimbered at the village edge and poured fire into French infantry attempting to reinforce. But the delay meant Waldegrave's brigade, already advancing, had outstripped the cavalry that should have protected their flank. And then came the infamous misunderstanding. Somewhere in the chain of command, perhaps from Ferdinand's staff to Sporkin, perhaps from Sporkin to the brigade commanders, an order was garbled. The French phrase, avancer sur le tambour, advance on the drum, meaning advance once the drum signal was given, became avancer au tambour, advance to the drum, meaning advance with drums beating. To British ears, accustomed to drums beating the advance as their standard practice, this sounded like an immediate order to attack. Major General Waldegrave did not question it. Neither did Major General Kingsley. These were professional officers following what they understood to be proper orders. Waldegrave's 3 battalions, the 23rd Royal Welsh Fusiliers on the left, the 37th in the center, the 12th on the right, stepped off at 7:30. Behind them, Kingsley's brigade, the 25th, 51st, and 20th followed. 9 battalions in 2 lines, approximately 4,400 men, roses in their hats, walking towards 10,000 French cavalry. Contemporary accounts record the astonishment of both armies. French cavalry officers could barely comprehend what they were witnessing. Infantry advancing without cavalry support, without flanking forces, directly towards massed heavy horse. It defied military logic. On the Allied side, Ferdinand himself initially thought Waldegrave had misunderstood and sent riders to recall the brigade. But Waldegrave and Kingsley, once committed, saw no choice but to continue. Halting in the open would be disastrous. Their only option was forward, maintain formation, maintain fire discipline, and trust their training. The British infantry emerged from a copse of trees onto open ground, roughly 600 yards from the French cavalry. Lieutenant General Fitzjames commanded the French horse, and he now faced an unprecedented tactical decision. Massed infantry in the open represented the cavalry's dream target, yet these infantry showed no signs of disorder. They advanced in perfect 2-rank. Lines, colors flying, sergeants dressing ranks with parade ground precision. Fitzjames decided on immediate attack before British nervousness broke their formation. The first charge came from 11 squadrons, the Royal Cravates and the Mestre de Camp under the Marquis de Castries. These were not light horsemen but fully armored cuirassiers, heavy cavalry bred and trained to shatter infantry. They came forward at the trot, building to a canter, finally to a full gallop in the last 100 yards. The ground trembled. Smoke from French artillery, already bombarding the British line, added to the chaos. This was the moment when infantry should break, when the sheer mass and momentum of cavalry charge overwhelmed men's courage. Waldegrave's front rank knelt, bayonets braced. The rear rank stood. Make ready, present, fire. The volley crashed out at 50 yards. The front rank of French cavalry simply dissolved, horses down, riders thrown, those behind unable to check their momentum and piling into the carnage. The British line had not fired high, as nervous troops do. They had aimed deliberately at horse and rider alike, with the mechanical precision of countless drill sessions. Before the French survivors could rally, the British infantry had reloaded, a second volley, then a third. The charge broke against controlled musketry like waves against stone. Castries reformed his survivors and tried again. Same result, disciplined volleys at close range, delivered with a calmness that spoke to extraordinary training. The charges did not simply fail, they were annihilated. French regimental histories would later describe British fire as like hell itself, an unending cascade of lead that made cavalry charges impossible. Lieutenant General Comte Gurchy, observing from the north, saw the developing crisis and led 8 infantry battalions against Waldegrave's right flank, the 12th Foot, already engaged frontally with cavalry. This should have been decisive. Infantry caught between cavalry and infantry rarely survived. But Ferdinand, watching from his command position, reacted instantly. He ordered General Scheele forward with 5 Hanoverian battalions and substantial artillery support. These German infantry, every bit as professional as their British allies, crashed into Gurchy's flank, halting the assault before it could develop. Meanwhile, Fitzjames committed his second wave 22 squadrons, including the Royal Étrangère, Bourgogne, and Brigade du Roi, over 4,000 horsemen in a massed charge that should have overwhelmed British infantry regardless of their fire discipline. But Kingsley's brigade had moved up, in support by now, extending the British line and doubling its firepower. The French horse came on magnificently. Courage and élan were never in question, but they rode into an industrial process of death. British infantry had learned to fire in controlled platoon volleys, ensuring constant volume, whilst individual companies reloaded. There was never a moment when French cavalry faced an empty gun. The cavalry broke, not because the riders lacked courage, but because flesh and blood, however brave, cannot sustain 30% casualties and maintain cohesion. Horses screamed, riders fell, and the survivors streamed back through their own lines, spreading disorder. Lieutenant General de Poyan now led forward the ultimate reserve, the Gendarmerie de France and the Carabiniers, the flower of French aristocratic cavalry. These were regiments that traced lineage to medieval chivalry, heavy cavalry of elite social standing and martial pride. If any troops in Europe could shatter infantry through sheer élan, these men could. They charged from the north, attempting to envelope Waldegrave's right flank, even as Poyan's infantry assault developed. Wutgenau's Hanoverian and Hessian infantry, deployed to the left of the British brigades, pivoted to meet this threat. The British infantry, now battle-hardened after repulsing 2 massed charges, simply adjusted their fire arcs and continued their methodical volleys. Poyan's charge achieved nothing beyond, adding to the carpet of dead and dying horses littering the battlefield. The Gendarmerie and Carabiniers, France's finest, recoiled in disorder. By 9 o'clock, the center of Contades's line had effectively ceased to exist. 3 massed cavalry charges destroyed, supporting infantry repulsed. French artillery, which had fired continuously, now risked hitting their own retreating troops. Contades, watching from his command post, faced the unthinkable. 6 British infantry battalions had shattered his tactical plan, but Ferdinand could not exploit the breakthrough because Sackville refused to advance the cavalry. 4 separate orders arrived. Ferdinand's staff officers personally carried them. The Earl of Granby, Sackville's deputy, attempted to lead the cavalry forward on his own authority. Each time, Sackville countermanded the movement. His reasons remain debated some. Historians suggest he genuinely misunderstood Ferdinand's intentions, others that he deliberately obstructed from personal pique. What is indisputable is that the British and Hanoverian cavalry, the most powerful striking force available, remained motionless throughout the crisis. Without cavalry exploitation, Ferdinand had to consolidate through infantry and artillery alone. As the rest of the Allied line came up, sustained artillery bombardment forced the French back. General Beaupréau attempted a counterattack with 8 fresh battalions on the French right, but 4 Hanoverian battalions checked them. Then Prussian and Hanoverian cavalry operating on the extreme left, where Sackville's authority did not extend, charged Beaupréau's flank, scattering the French infantry. On Contades's left, Saxon troops mounted a determined assault but were driven back by Sporkins. Command and concentrated artillery fire. The Royal Artillery batteries under Captains Foy, Macbean, Drummond, Williams, and Phillips distinguished themselves, particularly their light guns advanced with the infantry, providing close support that Continental doctrine considered impossibly risky but which British tactical doctrine demanded. When French forces began their general withdrawal back across the Bastow bridges around 11 o'clock, these same batteries unlimbered within musket range and poured fire into the retreating columns, turning retreat into rout. By noon, the Battle of Minden was over. 6 British infantry battalions, supported by German troops and British artillery, had achieved one of the century's most improbable victories. They had done what military theory said could not be done: advanced, unsupported against massed cavalry, and broken them through fire. Discipline alone. Discipline alone. The battlefield, after Minden, resembled an abattoir. French casualties would be officially reported as 7,000 killed, wounded, or captured, though private correspondence between Contades and Broglie admitted figures approaching 11,000. The French lost 17 colors and standards, those sacred symbols of regimental honor, and 43 artillery pieces. Baggage wagons abandoned in the retreat were counted in hundreds. Prince Ferdinand's army suffered 2,762 casualties. Half were British. The 12 regiments of British infantry and artillery paid the heaviest price. The 12th Foot recorded 17 officers and 272 men, killed and wounded, over a third of the regiment's strength. The 20th suffered similar devastation: 17 officers and 304 men. The 37th, standing in the center of Waldegrave's line where it bore the brunt of all 3 cavalry charges, lost 15 officers and 231 men. The Royal Welch Fusiliers recorded 10 officers and 196 men lost. Even the 51st, protected somewhat by its position, counted 10 officers and 98 men down. The 25th Foot reported 7 officers and 138 men casualties. These were not abstract numbers but shattered bodies, men who had stood their ground and paid the price of victory in blood. Contemporary medical practice offered little for the wounded beyond amputation and hope. Many would die of infections in the days following. Others would be invalided home. Their military careers ended before they reached 30. The wounded filled every available building in Minden and the surrounding villages, their cries audible across the battlefield for days. Yet, the immediate aftermath focused not on British heroism, but on British cavalry cowardice. Prince Ferdinand, normally controlled and diplomatic, could barely contain his fury at Sackville. The orders to advance had been explicit. Sackville's refusal to obey them had prevented what could have been the complete destruction of Contades' army. A pursuing cavalry force could have turned French retreat into massacre, possibly ending the French threat to Hanover for the remainder of the war. Ferdinand's dispatch to London, whilst outwardly polite, made his views clear. He praised the infantry and artillery extravagantly. The cavalry received damning silence. Sackville, reading the political winds, immediately began constructing his defense. He insisted the orders had been ambiguous, that advancing cavalry across terrain he had not personally reconnoitered would have been reckless, that Ferdinand misunderstood cavalry employment. His explanations convinced no one. Public opinion in Britain responded with characteristic bloodlust. Newspapers demanded Sackville's court-martial. Opposition members of Parliament saw an opportunity to embarrass the government through its incompetent appointee. King George II, already angered by what he perceived as Sackville's cowardice, dismissed him from all military appointments immediately, a sentence that cost Sackville roughly £5,000. Annual income. Sackville, stung beyond endurance, demanded a formal court-martial to clear his name. The king conceded reluctantly. In February and March of 1760, the court-martial convened at the Horse Guards in London. The proceedings became a national sensation. Witnesses from Minden testified to Sackville's repeated refusals to obey orders. Granby, attempting diplomacy but ultimately damning Sackville, described his growing horror as he realized the cavalry would not charge. The verdict shocked no one: guilty of disobeying orders. The sentence, however, demonstrated the 18th century establishment's reluctance to utterly destroy one of their own. Sackville was declared unfit to serve His Majesty in any military capacity whatsoever, not cashiering, which would have been the military death sentence his crimes deserved, but a worded reprimand that left the door ajar for future rehabilitation. And rehabilitated he was. Under King George III, Sackville, having changed his name to Lord Germain through inheritance, became Secretary of State for the American Department. In that role, he would help lose Britain's American colonies through the same mixture of obstinacy and incompetence he had displayed at Minden. But that tragedy lay in the future. The British infantry who actually won Minden received their immediate rewards with more genuine enthusiasm. Major General Waldegrave was promoted to Lieutenant General. Prince Ferdinand, in an unprecedented gesture, wrote personally to Captain McBean of the Royal Artillery, "It is to you and your brigade that I am indebted for having silenced the fire of a battery of the enemy, which extremely galled the troops." He directed his paymaster to distribute 1,000 crowns to Captain Phillips and 500 each to Captains McBean, Drummond, Williams, and Foy, for distribution amongst their men, substantial sums representing months of wages. The 6 infantry regiments received Minden as a battle honor, emblazoned on their colors for perpetuity. More enduringly, the tradition of Minden Day was born. Each 1st of August, the regiments would parade with roses, white for most regiments, red and white for the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, red and yellow for others, decorating their headdresses in commemoration of that march through German countryside. Officers' messes would hold Minden dinners, toasting the regiment's forebears who had achieved the impossible. Marshal Contades faced his own reckoning. Recall to Paris, where Belle Isle's fury at the defeat ensured Contades would never command in the field again. His military career ended at Minden, his reputation shattered. He is reported to have said bitterly, "I never thought to see a single line of infantry break through 3 lines of cavalry ranked in order of battle and tumble them to ruin." The quote may be apocryphal, but it captures the battle's unprecedented nature. The strategic consequences proved immense. French forces retreated south to Cassel, abandoning Minden and the towns captured earlier that summer. The threat to Hanover evaporated. More broadly, Minden was the decisive land battle of 1759's Annus Mirabilis, Britain's Year of Miracles. That same year saw Wolfe's triumph at Quebec, Hawke's naval victory at Quiberon Bay, and victories in India. Minden ensured that French resources would remain divided between multiple theaters, preventing concentration that might have reversed British gains elsewhere. Yet, even as Minden was being won, it was being forgotten. Quebec, dramatically visual with Wolfe's death and the scaling of the Heights of Abraham, captured British imagination completely. Minden, fought on German soil by regiments most Britons could not name, lacked comparable romance. The 18th century British public cared about empire and naval glory. Continental warfare was expensive, unglamorous, and involved defending German territories that aroused little patriotic fervor. Modern military historians recognize Minden's tactical significance more clearly than contemporaries did. The battle demonstrated definitively that well-trained infantry with superior fire discipline could defeat cavalry unsupported by combined arms. This lesson would reshape European warfare. Cavalry charges against formed infantry became progressively rarer. The Napoleonic era would see cavalry relegated primarily to pursuit, reconnaissance, and exploitation rather than frontal assault. British infantry doctrine learned equally important lessons. Minden validated the thin 2-rank line and rapid-fire emphasis. It proved that aggressive movement, even when unsupported, could succeed if troops maintained formation and fire discipline. The Battle of Waterloo, fought 56 years later, would see these same principles applied British infantry in two ranks, delivering controlled volleys, breaking French cavalry charges that history regarded as impossible to resist. The Royal Artillery drew its own conclusions. The mobile battery doctrine, light guns advancing with infantry to provide close support, proved itself at Minden. Captain Phillips, as Major General Phillips, would apply these lessons in the American War of Independence, commanding artillery under Burgoyne during the Saratoga campaign. Though that campaign ended in disaster, Phillips's artillery handling remained professional throughout. Perhaps most significantly, Minden demonstrated the importance of initiative and training at battalion level. Waldegrave and Kingsley's decision to continue their advance, rather than halt in confusion when they realized their error, showed command judgment of the highest order. The battalion and company commanders who maintained formation and fire discipline under conditions of unprecedented stress demonstrated that British Army training systems, despite their many flaws, produced tactically competent officers when it mattered most. The ordinary soldiers who achieved this victory received no individual recognition. Their names appeared only on casualty returns. Many died in obscurity, their graves unmarked. Others returned to garrison duty in Britain or Ireland, their extraordinary day fading into memory. This was the common soldier's lot. In the 18th century, achieve the impossible, then return to anonymity. But the roses remained. And every 1st of August, as successor regiments parade and commemorate, Minden's legacy lives on. The 21st Century Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, Royal Anglian Regiment, and Royal Regiment of Scotland all maintain the tradition. White roses in headdresses, Minden Day dinners. The memory of what their forebears achieved when 6 regiments broke French cavalry through discipline and courage alone. Prince Ferdinand of Brunswick continued commanding the Army of Observation until 1762, winning further victories at Warburg and Wilhelmsthal, but never achieving Minden's dramatic triumph. He retired after the war to his estates in Brunswick, declining Frederick the Great's offer of continued Prussian service. He died on the 3rd of July, 1792, aged 71, having witnessed the French Revolution's early upheavals but not living to see the revolutionary wars that would engulf Europe. His legacy in military history is curiously mixed. German historians recognize him as one of the 7 Years' War's finest commanders. British historiography, focused on Quebec and India, relegates him to footnotes. Yet, Ferdinand's operational art, combining aggressive maneuver with sound defensive positioning, exploiting enemy mistakes rather than seeking frontal confrontations, maintaining coalition cohesion amongst fractious German states, represented strategic sophistication that merits greater recognition. Lord George Sackville, as mentioned, resurrected his career as Lord Germain, becoming American Secretary during the Revolutionary War. His direction of British strategy in America demonstrated the same flaws visible at Minden: rigid insistence on his own judgment, refusal to credit subordinates' expertise, and inability to adapt to changing circumstances. His resignation in 1782 came too late to save Britain's American empire. He died on the 26th of August, 1785, still convinced he had been right at Minden. The 6 regiments carried Minden with them through subsequent centuries. The 12th Foot became the Suffolk Regiment, later amalgamated into the Royal Anglian Regiment. The 20th Foot, Lancashire Fusiliers, became part of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. The 23rd, Royal Welsh Fusiliers, maintained independent existence until 1795, then joined the Royal Welsh. The 25th Foot became the King's Own Scottish Borderers, now part of the Royal Regiment of Scotland. The 37th Hampshire Regiment, is now within the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. The 51st Foot, King's Own Yorkshire Light Infantry, became part of the Rifles. Each amalgamation and reorganization preserved Minden Day. The White Roses persist. In an age of decreasing public engagement with military tradition, this continuity matters. It connects serving soldiers to forebears who achieved something genuinely remarkable. Not merely victory, but victory achieved through professional excellence under impossible conditions. What lessons does Minden offer the modern world? First, that training and discipline remain force multipliers more powerful than technology or numbers. The British regiments at Minden possessed no equipment superiority over French cavalry. Their muskets were not more accurate, their bayonets not sharper. What they had was superior training, the ability to maintain formation and fire discipline when every instinct screamed to run. Second, that initiative and judgment at subordinate levels determine battle outcomes more surely than perfect plans from headquarters. Ferdinand's battle plan fell apart within an hour. What saved the day was Waldegrave and Kingsley's decision to continue rather than halt, and their battalion commander's ability to implement fire discipline without moment-to-moment supervision. Third, that combined arms cooperation, however unglamorous, matters more than individual arm superiority. Minden demonstrated this negatively. Sackville's cavalry failure prevented decisive victory, but it also showed positively through the Royal Artillery batteries that advanced with infantry, providing the close support that made the infantry advance possible. Fourth, that military innovation often comes from necessity rather than doctrine. The British two-rank line was born from manpower limitations. Britain could not field the massive armies continental powers raised. Making virtue from necessity, British doctrine maximized firepower per man. Minden validated this approach so thoroughly that European armies began copying it. Finally, Minden reminds us that military history extends beyond famous names and iconic battles. Quebec overshadowed Minden in popular memory. Despite Minden's equal strategic importance, Wolfe became a national hero whilst Waldegrave remained obscure. This pattern repeats throughout military history. Dramatic deaths and photogenic victories eclipse professional competence and steady courage. Yet, it is precisely that professional competence and steady courage that wins wars. The soldiers at Minden were not romantic heroes. They were professionals doing their jobs under conditions of extraordinary stress. They advanced because ordered to advance. They maintained formation because trained to maintain formation. They delivered controlled volleys because drilled to deliver controlled volleys. And because they did these things with mechanical precision, they achieved the miraculous. Military historians still study Minden at staff colleges. The tactical problems it presents, unsupported infantry advance, cavalry employment, combined arms cooperation, exploitation of victory, remain relevant to modern warfare despite transformed technology. The principles endure: training, discipline, initiative, professional competence. In Britain's collective memory, Minden has faded. Few outside military circles mark the 1st of August or understand the White Rose's significance. This is, perhaps, inevitable. Nations remember victories that serve national narratives. Trafalgar for naval supremacy, Waterloo for continental dominance, the Somme for sacrifice. Minden, fought on German soil by regiments defending the Hanoverian electorate, fits awkwardly into British national mythology. Yet, for those who do remember, Minden represents something profound. It shows ordinary soldiers achieving the impossible through extraordinary discipline. It demonstrates that victory comes not from élan or courage alone. The French cavalry possessed both in abundance, but from professional excellence, developed through unglamorous, repetitive training. It proves that in war, as in life, steady competence ultimately triumphs over flashy incompetence. So each 1st of August, small ceremonies occur. Successor regiments parade with roses. Old soldiers gather to toast absent comrades. The tradition continues, linking generations of British infantry to that morning when 6 regiments walked towards massed cavalry and broke them through disciplined volleys alone. Marshal Contades was correct, even in defeat. One should never see a single line of infantry break through 3 lines, and of cavalry ranked in order of battle, and tumble them to ruin. Yet at Minden, on the 1st of August, 1759, that impossible event occurred. British infantry made the impossible possible through training and courage. The roses, remember, and perhaps that is enough.